Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat Five segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. Hello. Welcome back to Big Fat Five, a podcast financially supported by Big Fat Snare Drum and a proud member of the Drum Click Podcast Network. This week's guest is producer, studio owner, and drummer Frankie Siragusa. We are switching up the format a little bit for this episode, and I had initially planned for this conversation to be a bonus episode, but I think it still falls into the traditional format in its own unique way. So I definitely repeat this with Frankie during the episode, but I'm sure we've all heard a producer or bandmate say, "Hey, give me a Ringo vibe," when writing parts for a new song. But what the hell does that even mean? In my humble opinion, Frankie is the guy to explain what that does and doesn't mean, and you'll find out why pretty quickly in the interview. This episode is just 2 Beatle maniacs talking about one of the greatest to ever do it, so please enjoy our chat about the 5 key elements that make Ringo Starr Ringo Starr. This is guaranteed to improve your drumming or you get your money back. Enjoy. So we've known each other for a little bit because you've mixed and I believe mastered some songs from a project I've worked on. You played drums on a mutual friend of ours, Nicholas McGallis's record.
Yes.
Shout out to Nick, I love him. And you play with the Posies. Love everything you do. But for the people that might not know who Frankie is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of I guess a jack of all trades. I my Instagram bio changes, I feel like, every couple months on what hat I'm wearing this month. But yeah, I have a recording studio called the Lab Studio here in Los Angeles, and do all sorts of work there. It's always different. So sometimes I get hired to do drums, sometimes I get hired to engineer things, sometimes produce and collaborate with people. So really is a jack of all trades kind of thing. I just like making music, and I just do that in a variety of ways with people in usually a collaborative sense. But like you said, I also play in the Posies, which is one of my favorite groups growing up. So that's a total bucket list dream come true that I'm living out. And also periodically do my own solo records, which is just my chance to be indulgent and, do things for no other reason than just because I want to. And some people find those records interesting, and those are just under my name, Frankie Siragusa. And in the next 5 years, who knows what I will add to that, but I'm constantly trying to branch out and be creative in a variety of ways. I also recently did a music video for the Posies, as well as a group called the Licorice Quartet, which are 3/4 of the lineup of Jellyfish, the Spelt Milk era.
Yes,
so,
wow.
Kind of helped manage that release as well as do creative for music videos. So yeah, I'm kind of wrapped up in all sorts of things creative. If somebody has a need for something, I'll always try to figure out how I can help. That's kind of me. I did not know that
about the Licorice Quartet. How'd you get hooked up with those guys?
Well, I worked with Roger on his solo record called Glamping, or EP, I should say. And that was maybe, I don't know. My sense of time sometimes is all over the place, but I feel like it was like
I'm
5
with
or
you.
6 years ago. And then, he was reuniting with Tim and Eric of the Spilt Milk era of Jellyfish to do a project, which was at that time unnamed, and thought I might be a good fit for helping engineer that, and our connection was really good. My rapport with him was already solid, but I hadn't worked with Tim and Eric yet, and it just kind of all gelled. And so I helped engineer all 3 of the EPs that they will be releasing. They've released 2 of the 3 so far, finishing the 3rd now. Then they went DIY for EP2, just kind of deciding to see how they can have a go at self-managing their career, but with maybe somebody in place that can be an extra pair of hands and maybe a help with some ideas on how to promote and position the release and stuff. So I kind of helped them with that as well, which also, again, translated to doing some music video production. So I'm kind of involved with those guys in a variety of ways. I'm also now doing a video series for Roger on his solo Instagram page, which is called Synth Saturdays. Basically, we're featuring a new synth of his every week, which, if you're a fan of his, is really exciting, which I am a fan. So just seeing all of his obscure equipment and things like that. So always bouncing around with these folks that I grew up listening to, just being involved in however I can.
Gosh, dude. Well, you've earned every second of it, so
Thank you.
That's great, man.
I appreciate that.
So I wanted to have you on the show to specifically, well, at first this was going to be a bonus episode, not because I didn't think the content was worthy of a full episode. It was quite the opposite, but it was more so because Big Fat Five is essentially bringing on a specific drummer, talking about their influences, which I actually do want to have you back on for that format as well. But I think that what we're doing today, which is dissecting 5 elements that make Ringo Ringo, I'm going to have fun with it. And I think that still kind of ties into the inspirations of certain drummers, because you can be inspired by these 5 elements. So you released a record in 2020 called Goodbye My Love, Lost Songs of the Beatles, Covered and Rediscovered. And I wanted to have you on because, of course, everyone just heard how busy you are and how multifaceted you are. So as a producer, I'm sure you've either said or heard, give me the Ringo thing. Yeah. And if you're in the industry long enough, any drummer will hear that. And so this subject has not necessarily been uncharted, but I think someone who has released a record specifically trying to channel Ringo through themselves the way you did on that record, I think you're kind of a current apex of someone who'd be able to talk about this. So I did want to play a few songs from that record and play the original and then the one that you did. And then I also have a little backstory on the 3 that I chose, but maybe you can tell me why you chose those songs. Okay. And then we'll get into the 5 elements that I agree with everything you said make Ringo Ringo. Yeah. But let's just start off with a song called Like Dreamers Do, and that's written by Paul McCartney. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is not Ringo on this track. It's actually Pete Best. Am I correct?
What? I'm not actually sure about the original, because a lot of these songs were not performed by the Beatles. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, but that's not an absolute statement, because like a song like Sour Milk Sea, even though it was Jackie Lomax, had members of the Beatles backing him. So I'm not actually sure who the drummer is on the original.
From the one, I think the one I chose, it's called Like Dreamers Do. Like I said, it's written by Paul McCartney in '59, and I think this is actually the recording of their quote unquote unsuccessful Decca Records audition.
Oh gosh. I don't even know if I've heard this. This is exciting.
I think it's the one that's on Spotify in their catalog, but I believe it's actually this is pre-Ringo, and of course they did not get the record contract for this, which is, I'm sure whoever was in charge of that is fired, or maybe even dead now. But yeah. So this is the recording, and I think this is actually Pete Best, but still it still channels Ringo, and it also shows how much better their songwriting got later on. But this is still a really awesome song. So yeah, like Dreamers Do, this is a live recording.
I forget the artist that ended up releasing Like Dreamers Do. It for some reason the name is escaping me, but we'll just have it blink at the bottom here in the,
exactly.
in the edit. But I believe that was the version that. So when this project came about, the label that ended up putting it out was the one that kind of pitched me on it. Do you want to do songs written by the Beatles but not recorded by them? And I said, well, that sounds fun, and I was allowed full creative control, and so I kind of did my own reimagining of them and kind of created a storyline and all that stuff. Not to get into too much of the backstory yet, but all this to say there was already kind of like the versions of these songs were kind of pre-selected and sent to me, and I had no idea that the Beatles actually did this one, so I can't wait to hear it.
Sweet.
I'm super curious now.
I saw a girl in my dreams, and so it seems that I will love her. Oh, you are that girl in my dreams, and so it seems that I will love you. And I waited for your kiss.
Wow. Pretty rad, huh?
That is so different. And
yes,
I'm kind of glad I'm hearing that now and not initially. That may have totally changed my interpretation of it. So that's so fascinating. But awesome. It's so cool hearing Paul's voice on that.
I know, and he's trying to be. I don't think he found his Paul voice yet, because he was trying to be a little more deep and
like Elvis
you could tell,
or something.
Yeah, you could tell he was nervous, and it's really fun, kind of knowing the backstory of that performance. But so this is Frankie's version, and again, you can tell right off the bat, drum wise, totally different.
I saw a girl in my dreams, and so it seems that I will love her. Oh, you are that girl in my dreams, and so it seems that I will love you. And I waited for your kiss, waited for the bliss like dreamers do.
The reason why, or one of the reasons I love this record, is you really do capture the sonics, the panning of the drums, and like everything. You do really capture the essence of the songs, which, I mean, the way those songs are mixed and sound are just as much as part of the song as the mix, or sorry, as the melody,
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, no, I've spent a lot of time kind of laboring over that and trial and error, because, you can take, a 60s Ludwig, even get it to sound, tuned and all that stuff like Ringo may have had it. You can even try to play it like Ringo, but you're still not in Abbey Road, and maybe the mics are not quite right, and you're not. I wasn't on tape. I was on Pro Tools for this, so I had things kind of. It's never going to be exact, and so I was trying to just make sure it felt like what I would envision that era of the Beatles to sound like, that sort of mid '60s thing. But it was also just kind of like really fun to try it out without having to apologize for how close it sounded like to the Beatles, because that was the point. A lot of times, I've kind of thought that it's very possible when I'm playing on people's records that like the Beatle influence is showing through a little too much. So I got to reel that in a little bit.
Sure.
Do something unique with it, Let it be an influence, but not too much. This was like a process where I could just be full on 100% as Beatle-y as I could possibly make it, So it was really, really fun to try things out and kind of come to some determinations of, oh, that's why it sounds that way, and it's sometimes aspects of the recording that is different than you would assume. Like for one thing that was really major in why the drums sound the way they do on those Beatle records, and not just Beatle records, probably all records of that time, is even though they might be separately tracking, not separately tracking, but separately miking the drum kit, certainly far less than they are now, but it wasn't just one mic on a kit now.
Yeah.
I think at that point they were using like 5 or something. That was still being treated as one channel, like by the time that they were processing it. So when it was being compressed, it wasn't being EQ'd or compressed individually, or at least that's what I landed on in terms of what worked for me. Is when I chose to, even though it was separately mic'd, view it as one thing. I have to treat it as one. All of a sudden, the compression starts manipulating the kit in that sort of mid-60s Beatle-y way, completely different than if you were to compress the kick, compress the snare, and maybe add a little subgroup compression. They weren't getting that micro yet. And so that was part of it, too. It's like, leave the mics completely open and natural, and then all your, if you want to add brightness, if you want to, whatever that they might have done, that has to be done with everything summed to one channel. And so I would do that. I would actually take the 5 mics and record it to one channel. So I didn't even have the option of kind of massaging the mix. I tried to burn the bridge the same way they would have. So I was kind of stuck with one track of drums, even though I had the capability to do it more micro than that. I just didn't want that. And by the time I even mixed it, I was left with 4 tracks because they were only tracking on a 4-track at that point. And I would maybe do drums, bass, and a guitar, and then I'd sum that to one track and delete the raw stuff. So I was like, this is what the band would have tracked to, one track and done. And then, by the time I got done, I was like, I've got my 4 tracks, and maybe track 1 is drums and bass and guitar. And if I pan that left, it's not just drums, everything else is coming with it. And tried to put myself in build in the same limitations they would have, not just for the novelty of it, but just so it would actually influence my workflow and hopefully the end result, which I think it did. Had I not done it that way, I think it would have been maybe more slick, or I don't know what. Other things would have happened for sure. So it was kind of worth going extra geeky and just seeing, how much I can replicate what limitations they would have had, even though it's superimposed. It's like I didn't have to do that.
Sometimes if a drum set doesn't sound good in the center, if you push it to one side, it makes sense then. Let's see if I'm describing this well. It's just when you push it to one side, some of the errors you don't care about anymore. It's like, oh, it's got this vibe now, and it just sounds better, I think.
Well,
personally.
without introducing a really terrible pun here, it's no longer the center of attention. It's like definitely one of the elements instead of, I think that's what you get when you have stuff on the sides. That becomes your ear candy, and then down the center is like that's the anchor. So if the drums aren't the anchor anymore, it kind of opens up the possibility for other things to share that priority, I guess, for the ears. But it's unnatural at first when you're not used to working that way. Like if you throw it off to one side, initially you're like, whoa, why would I do that? And, you try to start balancing that. I mean, one thing that I struggled with was mastering. When I finally was mastering, and especially I'm mastering it for Spotify here, so I'm trying to get it to some sort of competitive volume, even though they're going to normalize it anyway. I'm like, okay, I kind of, like, the mix sounds fine to me, but when I'm looking at it, like, the left is way more active because of the maybe drums or whatever, and so it's like, how is that throwing the master, and because it's in stereo, do I not master in link mode anymore, Little things like that, like, it was really trial and error before I finally, I think, got it to where it like all made sense, even with all those kind of quirky hard pan things, which I think after reading some articles, like George Martin and the Beatles were not happy about some of those moves. I don't know if you read that at all, but like apparently at least for some of those records, the stereo mixes were not really that important because they weren't sure that was a medium that was going to take off yet. So the mono mixes were the ones that the Beatles were present on that they worked really hard with. And I think even some of the stereo mixes, nobody was present but like the assistant or something. They were just like, yeah, just, pan some things and be done with it. And then those become what everybody knows. The mono mixes were kind of a novelty and stuff that people would seek out and check out later. And I think there's even like a note to the record label that George Martin wrote in 1987, I think it was, when they digitized the Beatle records to be released on CD for the first time, that because the stereo mixes were not really to the standards that George Martin was happy with, he said, take my name off of this as producer.
Wow.
So he was not happy with those mixes, and it wasn't until whenever they did the re-releases, which would have been, I guess, maybe 10 years ago, when they did the box sets, that's the first time they remastered anything since 1987. And I think probably for the stereo mixes, I think they retained all those terrible panning things that George Martin didn't like. I love that stuff.
No, me too. That's so funny that they didn't approve of that. Can you imagine the Beatles thinking about, like, going back in time, thinking about how's this going to work on Spotify and having that dictate how they did stuff? That would be... I've always thought that what would happen if you time traveled and brought those five, including George, and brought them to today's technology, what they could accomplish with that creativity, with the seemingly endless options.
I think they would have done a lot with it because I think they would have called probably, bullshit on the methodology of why certain things get applied in the digital realm. Because if you think about it, all this loudness war stuff and everything being so brick-walled, like compression was employed because, they were trying to get volume of certain pieces of the audio above the noise floor because they were limited by whatever it was, tape hiss, vinyl noise, you name it. And now in the digital world, we don't have any of that. So you would think it would open up the world to more dynamic music because we no longer have that noise floor, or at least not the same kind of noise floor. There's always some kind, but it's so far down that, you could be as dynamic as you want. And yet, even with all that flexibility and technological advances and stuff, we went the opposite direction. Less bandwidth, less dynamics, and just totally unnecessarily. And especially when we have things in place that are like, Spotify normalizes. So you really don't need to overcompress anymore, but people are still doing it. And so I think if you were to take a band like the Beatles and, shotgun them to now, and we tell them why we do things a certain way, they'd be like, that's so backwards. No. And probably use the technology as it should be used. Maybe I'm being a little bit, sentimental about it, but I really think that, like, back then they did things for a reason that was just because of the science and whatever. Now it's just because. Why do you auto-tune every vocal? No, just because that's what everybody else does. Not because that's what's needed here. But I feel like actually I've done a few podcasts over the last few weeks, and I keep talking about that. I keep bringing that up. I guess that's a bee in my bonnet or something, where it's like just this idea that we have to do certain things, and it's so frustrating.
Hey man, get the word out.
It's like you look, this process of doing this Beatles thing, it's like you're talking about very, very primitive practices and equipment, and some of the best methods of recording, in my opinion, some of the best methodical approaches to producing, that at least for me haven't been beat, and I'm not saying that modern music doesn't have anything to offer. I love modern music and all that stuff. It's just when you really look at like what people needed to have, I guess, as as a way of making the kind of music they made back in the 60s. It required, like, for instance, the engineers were borderline scientists, like in the early 60s or whatever, they were wearing, lab coats in the recording studio. It was those people knew not just why turning a knob sounded better or that it did sound better. They understood the components. They understood if it wasn't sounding right, why that was. It wasn't just trial and error. I mean, pushing boundaries and misusing gear in a creative way is obviously trial and error because you're breaking rules and that's uncharted territory. But I still love when you listen back to 60s and 70s records, it's really an art form that I feel like people nowadays don't actually have. Doesn't mean that they don't make good sounding records, but it's all algorithms, it's all presets, it's and they have no, I think most people who might be creative, it's not to say that people aren't creative today. I mean, people are just as creative now as ever, but it's the I guess ownership of your title, having like real backing of know-how that I feel is missing with a lot of people. When I use a plugin and I pull up a preset, I understand what that's doing because a lot of times I've used the hardware version or some type of hardware equivalent. And even then, I still feel a little bit like a poser because I couldn't open up any of this gear and tell you what's a capacitor from a resistor. So
sure,
I'm on the 50-yard line of being thrown out of this conversation. But but all this to say, like I think there is something to that. I don't know where that all came from, but I think you asked one question. And
I said hi, Frankie.
Yeah.
No, but to add to that, there was I do agree. I think a lot of people do things because you're just you put EQ, then you put compress, and then you just they have this story that they just automatically tell every time. And I heard this story once of this person saying, "Well, there's my grandma's bread recipe that we've had for generations in our family's recipe, and it's like." Step 1, 2, 3, and number 4 was always cut off 3 inches of each side, and no one ever thought about it, like why you did it. It's like, maybe it's to preserve the moisture or something, but that's just what they did. And finally, they like researched it, and they were like, it's because her oven was only a certain size. So they just kept doing this for years and years, and it was just because she functionally had to do that. And so it's kind of like what you were saying is they did things because their oven was too small, and now people just cut it off because that's what you do.
Yeah, that's a really good story. I'm gonna steal that.
All right, I'll try and text you where I heard it from, but all right. So number 2 is you already mentioned it, but it's Sour Milk Sea, and so it's not by the Beatles. It's it was written by I believe George Harrison, but it was recorded and released. I think it was the first single from Apple Records, which was the Beatles record label, by Jackie Lomax. So here's this. And again, you also mentioned it. It does have Paul, Ringo, and George playing on this track.
If your life's not right, doesn't satisfy you, you don't get the breaks like some of us do.
All right, so that's Jackie's, and now let's play your version.
If your life's not right, doesn't satisfy you, you don't get the breaks like some of us do. Better work it out.
So rad, man. Yeah, you can totally tell that's a Beatles song.
Yeah, for sure.
They have it.
I think that song I couldn't help but kind of just do my best cover.
Sure. That one needs that.
That one I was like, it was going to be more unnatural to try to just do something different with it, to just do it different. I'm like, you know what? If anything, I'm gonna treat the Jackie Lomax version like it was the Beatles demo, and then I'm gonna just try to record it like the final product. Now that's kind of a really pretentious thing to aim for, but like, just again, these are just thoughts that like I'm trying to work with. I know. It's like these are things. So if I were the listener, I'd stop listening at this point.
Yeah.
But,
you're among friends here, I think.
Yeah. Hopefully. But it was little things like, I think if this had been on the White Album, they probably would have doubled the vocal, or at least put ADT on it. And I think in that pre-chorus there would have been some sort of like seventh harmony. So it's like little things of like how would the guys together have flourished this a bit more, because I believe this was a George production, so the other guys played on it, but I don't think it was like a group effort to make it Jackie's. It was just George probably employing the other guys to play on it. So I just thought it could have been maybe a little more colorful, but for the most part, like the drum groove, the way the bass is played, that lead guitar, it's like there's nothing to fix.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a great tune. I wish there was a Beatles version of it.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like Jackie Lomax's version, but I would have loved to have heard George's voice. And I think Ken did a fantastic job on singing that. So that's Ken Stringfellow.
Well, you did a great job of matching those guitar tones. That sounds great. And the Ringo fill, you got that fill in there, which I believe was pretty... Exactly. All right, so for the sake of time, let's just go to I'm in Love.
Yeah.
Which is by The Foremost. And there's some people say it was written by John. Some people say it was written in the back of a van between Paul and John. But regardless, here is I'm in Love by The Foremost.
I got something to tell you. I'm in love. I've been longing to tell you. I'm in love. You believe me when I tell you. I'm in love with you. You're my kind of girl. You make me feel proud. You make me want to shout all around. There's no telling all my friends.
That's so good. Such a Beatles thing where they have this kind of intro melody and then they just go right into the verse.
Yeah.
It's
She
so
loves
good.
you and
Exactly.
that kind of thing, yeah.
And there is a version where John is, I believe it's a demo just on piano, just singing that song. I believe it might have been something he sent to those guys in The Foremost, but it's John sounds great doing it as well. It's obviously a little more sentimental because it's just an upright piano. But this is now Frankie's version.
I've got something to tell you. I'm in love. I've been longing to tell you. I'm in love. You'll believe me when I tell you. I'm in love with you. You're my kind of girl. You make me feel proud. You make me wanna shout out loud. Yes, I'm telling all my friends I'm in love.
That was sick, man. I like at the beginning the strumming guitar is kind of giving that backbeat that's not there besides the tambourine.
Yeah,
very cool.
Good catch. Yeah, that was when I heard the version you played before. It felt, and again, I was trying to. I wasn't able to be 100% successful at this, but I was trying to make it more mid-period Beatles than anything early. But some of these songs can't help but introduce a little bit of that. But I tried my best to just think of, like, I'm picturing Ringo at this point, feeling like I've played it straight up to this point. Let's try something different. Or maybe Paul would have suggested that or something. So I thought, and there are some of the, I don't have any references right off the top of my head, but where some type of percussive element, maybe it's some type of rusty tambourine or something that's helping anchor you on the one or somewhere where the rest of the kit is not, to just give you some type of composite that's giving you everything that you need. It's not too disorienting. And so that was kind of the idea there. And then the other thing was in just trying to make it more mid-period Beatles too, was just to get rid of all of that very big reverb. So kind of trying to do more buzzy, dry electrics, and the drums can be roomy but not reverby. It's more just like you hear like a little bit of sustain in the room, but that's pretty much it. No top snare mic, that kind of thing. And that's Keith Sledadal, who kind of sang for Paul, harmonizing with me on that. So what we did for some of these songs where where there's like a unison and then it breaks for a harmony and then it goes back to unison, I made sure that the unison was still done by somebody else, just to help it feel more like John and Paul would have done it.
It'd be cool. I know this is a drum-centric podcast, but it would be cool because that thing you just described, is that a Beatles thing they did a lot? Unison, harmony, back to unison?
I think that was... I don't think they invented it. I mean, I think that was more a thing of just the early 60s of like vocal groups would sometimes thicken their melody, but then splinter off when it needed to become more melodically dense or whatever. I'm not really sure where that came from, but I definitely... There's some definite examples of like early Beatles stuff where a lot of the verse is them singing in unison. And it's such an interesting way to get a double vocal effect. I mean, that's probably where doubling vocals came from, was just this idea of, what it sounds like when you stack. And then for whatever reason, maybe there was a solo singer that wanted to get that same effect, but just didn't have a counter vocalist. And now you've got vocal doubling happening, which is sort of an interesting, sing it twice and we'll play both of them at the same time. It's like before that's been invented, that seems like such an odd suggestion. But that was a really fun song, and that comes right after this like musical intro that's like a minute long, that this kind of buttons up against. So it kind of that really quick start of having a vocal that's, soloed, kind of works when it's all kind of being played together.
In context, yeah. Yeah, it'd be cool. What I was trying to say earlier was it'd be fun to have you on, even though it's a drumming podcast, to talk about what you think makes a Beatles song. Like you were saying, going to the seventh in the pre-chorus, you thought the Beatles would do that. It seems like you have suggestions on if a drummer or, someone is trying to become more of a producer, just to know that stuff. Like, what would they do? Not to rip it off, but it's something that I wish I knew more about.
Well, it's somewhat era-specific, too, because it's not to go super long-winded here, but a good example is Sgt. Pepper with the start of Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane recording. That's the first time Paul was overdubbing bass. He was doing bass very last. So he was doing either a guitar or a piano with the rest of the band when laying down the raw foundation. Everybody would go home and he'd stay at the studio in the after hours and just noodle. And so you can hear an evolution in his bass lines, even though he's still super melodic in the early recordings. From Sgt. Pepper on, you can hear how the bass line become kind of counterparts or harmonic parts to the vocal. And how else can you do that then to record the bass last when you have all that information to play with and to explore and experiment with. And then, you get the sound of the bass changing too, because now that the rest of the band isn't being played at the same time, they can move that microphone 6 feet away from the bass cab versus having it right on or DI or whatever, which I don't think they did DI very much. So there's things like that. Like I feel like, and that was one of the things which I'm sure we're leading into here, is like into picking 5 unique things about Ringo is the same thing. It's like it kind of depends on the era you're looking for, because there's not. It just right off the top of my head, I would go, yeah, there's definitely like a Ringo thing. Like if somebody said play Ringo, I would kind of know what that means. But if you want to like actually dig in, it's sort of like, well, kind of swingy windshield wiper hi-hat Ringo, or more sparse wallet on the snare drum, like Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour, or Tea Towel drums, White Album, Abbey Road, fill oriented.
Yep.
Like they're very different.
Exactly, which is why I think you're the person to have on, because I echo exactly what you were saying, or what you are saying. So let's just jump into it. And so, again, to kind of contradict what you just said, we are going to have 5 ways to be Ringo. I'm not sure if you have the list in front of you, or I can just say I don't want to speak.
Studied.
Okay. Well, then, just go ahead, and then we will play audio examples for each one. But you can just start off with number 1.
So the first thing, which I think most people would probably, and I think this actually is not as era specific as maybe the rest, is drum fills. The way he naturally plays drum fills. I think part of it, he's explained, is that he's left-handed, so he starts his fills with the opposite hand. But I think that's not all of it, and I don't know if I really have a determination on what it is, other than it's this. Like, for me, it kind of feels like somebody skipping down the road. I don't know. It just feels very like da 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 da. You know, it just has this like joy to it, even when it's a dark song. Like, I feel like, and this is not one of the examples I gave, but like, "Happiness is a Warm Gun." There's so many cool drum fills in that, and that is not like a happy-go-lucky song. That's very dark,
dark
for them. You know,
yeah.
But it adds like a little pep to the whole thing, and I think that's what I really. It's very Tom oriented. Like I feel like maybe there's some snare rolls and stuff, but when I think Ringo fills, there's this interplay and mixing up how you use the whole kit, and it's not any one thing. It's more of a personality, because, you know, there are examples of him going reverse Tom order. So it's not just like he's going, you know, there's not like just one preset, but there is like a general feel, and it's kind of a little bit clumsy. They are sometimes influenced by the musical hooks of the song, or they are in place of where there would have been a musical hook. Come Together would be a great example of that. I mean, it is a hook, down, 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 but there is a pause. There's a lot of like sustained notes, and he's just. It's such a. We take that song for granted because everybody's heard that song a million times. Yeah, that's Come Together. But, you know, even the like not so savvy Beatles fan, you could sing the drum part, da da, and people go, "Come Together." You know, like, that's incredible. that you could create a musical, a drum hook. And then you have John, which I'm sure was influenced by the drum beat, intentionally or unintentionally, by doing the shh, and then having the triplet delay. It's call and response of that. Just, you know, that'll lead us into my number 5, by the way, but, you know, we'll save that. And there's a thing there, too, that I think displays his left hand issue, is that he goes back once on those toms.
Oh, okay,
so it's not, you know, it goes back once. And I think that's because he's trying to get over, but he's, you know, there's something.
That's funny.
I'm taking a guess there. It might have just been purposeful, too. He might have just wanted some interplay. But that didn't dawn on me until like 15 years after I heard it. And this is one of the this is why I continue to be obsessed, because it never stops revealing things for me. And there's a part in here, too, I think it's the 3rd time around in the kick drum, you know, do, 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 do. There's one where he does do, 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 do. He adds like an extra kick. You got to listen for it. Do, 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 do. But I shouldn't be that like impressed or anything, but it's just subtle, nuanced things that I just haven't heard. For that one came even later. You know, it's like I'm still hearing new things from this, you know, drum beat I kind of take for granted. and then I become super like little kid about it again. I'm like, oh my God, that kick drum's different. And why? That's so freaking cool. It's so like, anyway, sounding like a total dork now.
All right, so number 2 for you, or still on number 1,
Still
but the
on
second
number
example.
1, yeah. I'm going to draw this out. It's she said, and I think that if you were to like have most drummers play in a verse and in a chorus where the fill is happening every measure, it just would not work primarily. You're like, just chill out and play the beat. You're like getting in the way. It's not all about you, man. And I feel like somehow Ringo has a way of being super active without distracting at all. And so it's, but then there's also the way he handles all the sort of cut time in the chorus, where things aren't happening in perfect fours or whatever, that kind of keeps that section from sounding complicated, and that's, I think, due to him choosing when to be double time and not double time, which is super smart, because if you're double time, then if you change on the 6th bar, it's not going to throw you off the same way it would if you were playing regular time. So might have been just instinctual and not super like technically minded, or maybe it was, but it totally works and accomplishes the goal. And also contrasts his busy verse too. So again, just like a perfect drum idea, in my opinion, from top to bottom.
Yeah, he's a mystical person. Like, he's never, obviously he's done interviews. He doesn't like interviews from what I've heard, but he doesn't do a lot of them dissecting his own drumming. There's a few videos out there where he plays, I think he plays Ticket to Ride, and I think he plays Come Together, and kind of talks about him, but he's not one to dissect or have people ask him and then dissect his drumming. So a lot of these questions we don't know if it was super off the top of his head, or if he couldn't count, he just was going off the melody, like what his motivations were for what he did. But let me just play She Said, She Said. Yeah. And if that's when they really started to use the limiter on the drums.
Yeah.
And
the ye old Fairchild, the 660.
Like to be dead. I know what it is to be sad, and she's making me feel like I've never been wrong. I said,
no cymbals, no hat. Well, I mean accents, but
yeah,
he's not keeping time anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else does it for me like that.
Yeah, I want to play a few, and that kind of showcases drum fills. And I'm going to start with "Oh Darling" at around 55 seconds into the song.
Leave me alone.
And that's pretty fast for Ringo. He's doing some crazy stuff around the kit there. But again, starting with just eighth notes and then going to stumbly drunk drummer thing, then doing the ticka. He just knows how to build up tension that a lot of drummers don't understand.
And just even the regular beat. I saw a video of him from like the 90s playing, and he's just doing a regular beat. And it's just the way he's kind of playing it. It's sort of like how like a chef uses a knife kind of thing, where it's like, it's not, you're letting the knife do all the work kind of thing. And it's like his limbs and his sticks just kind of, they just lay in without, it's not like he's taking all this torque and throwing it in there. And it's just so heavy and like laid back, but in the groove and in the pocket. I just think it's in his whole body that it's just a regular beat, like in that chorus, just even that sounds like him, and it's just a regular kick snare hat beat. And it's so strange. It's not just the sound. There's something about the way he lays back on it.
My next one, I can't move on without playing the end, which is basically a Ringo drum solo at the beginning. And the cool thing, I don't know how to play that. It sounds simple, but because he is left-handed, I'm sure however I think it's played is not intuitive to me.
Yeah.
And then there is kind of the going into the end of that song. He does a very simple fill. I'll play both of them real quick. Then we can move on.
Yes.
It's so good. And then it's this fill around 1:30 that I just love.
And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
So good. All right. Yeah. All right.
And just the sound of the drums too, that it's interesting that like some of them are super dry and dead and some of them are ambient, and it's an interesting choice. You would think that would be totally disconnected, but it totally works.
Very much so.
Do not understand why it was done that way. Pick one way or the other. I wouldn't change it now in hindsight, but it's just weird.
Well, that's kind of going back to the oven thing. It's because, like, why would you would think if I'm going to deaden this rack tom, it sounds good, just throw it on the floor tom as well. But he was like, no, I like how that sounds. I like how that sounds. So there we go.
Yeah.
But all right, so number two.
Number two I have is the hi-hat swipe, which that like windshield wiper back and forth swish. It's kind of a lot of things, but it's super heavy-handed, and it's not all consistent. It's got like a push-pull thing, which I think is why he probably did that. I don't know if that was just a thing back then, if other drummers were doing that, but I don't really. It seemed to be so synonymous with him. So maybe there were other people. So I don't want to say he invented it, but he certainly made it popular, I think. And so when you're playing early Beatle tune, like if you were doing something that sounded like early 60s and somebody said, play the Ringo thing, well, era specific, I would probably think, well, you want some really washy hats. Mm-hmm. And so I've got two songs for that. The first one being All My Lovin'.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll ride home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you. I'll pretend that I'm kissing the lips
I love the accidental double time on that second round.
Oh, really?
At the top of it.
Oh! I was listening to the hi-hat, and of course, whack-a-mole. I wasn't paying attention to that either. So he's boo, boo, cat, and he just goes boo, cat, boo, boo, cat. Oh, that, okay.
Just an interesting beat anyway. I love that one. And then the other one I had was Hard Day's Night, which I know some of these are maybe the generic easy way out, but they're just so... they highlight it so much.
Jesse Congos was talking about Bill Withers and stuff like that, where there's things that are so ingrained into our zeitgeist, into everything, that we do take them for granted. So you go, oh, well, that song, But it's like Hard Day's Night is an incredible song. So you don't want to be like, I don't want to say that because it's that song. Similarly to Come Together, but...
Especially when you have the chord that announces Hard Day's Night, it's like, they knew. They're like, this is the one. Boom.
This is going to fuck with some people's heads. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night, I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel alright. You know I work all day.
I'm realizing right now, I don't listen to enough Beatles records on headphones. You know, it's always in my car, or they're always just, you know, in the house stereo. But you get so like I've never realized, or I'm sure I've realized, but I forgot that there was the bongos in that are going crazy. By the way, they're like lay off the caffeine there, bud. But
and the hi-hat in that one is like louder than anything else on the drum kit. Like you kind of hear the snare, you kind of hear the kick drum, but the hi-hat is just there. It's like a shaker or something. So, that's an obvious attribute of Ringo, I feel. That's an easy one. Shall we move on to number 3?
Yeah, I wanted to play one, and it's just Please Please Me.
Oh, right. Yes.
Last night I said these words to my girl. I know you never even tried, girl. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
And I'm realizing on this recording, it sounds like he's on the ride, but I was going off a video of Ringo playing this live, and he's doing the verse part on hi-hats, and then the come on, he goes to the crash ride that he plays.
It does sound like ride here, but I seem to remember that being hi-hat as well, probably because of the same thing.
Exactly.
So it's not your fault, man.
Well, I was listening to it, I got really insecure. I was like, oh, shit.
Ringo,
no,
pick
this
a
is about
lane,
a fill.
man.
It was the fill. Yeah. That's it. I'm not calling him back now.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, now you can go on to number 3.
So number 3, which, I don't know, deconstructing the beat to fit the song is what I wrote, which I feel like I wish I could reduce that to a single word. Deconstructing, I guess. But it's like he's, especially after those first few records, you know, when they started getting into like Rubber Soul and Revolver, and then certainly he, you know, perfected that in the later records as well. Just being able to not play straight ahead, sometimes not play at all, or maybe it's just a ride keeping time where you would think the song is supposed to elevate, but he kind of pulls back. And I know he just had a really unique way of interpreting the song rhythmically, and that's kind of like, there's some famous quote out there. It's like it's the notes you don't play or something. It might have been Miles Davis or something like that. And I think Ringo did that as a pop drummer very well. And so Rain would be my first pick on that one. Just even the chorus being reversed cymbals, and, you know, just in general, it's such a unique drum approach, especially for when that came out. They hadn't even done Sgt. Pepper yet, so, you know, it's still, 64, 65, to be thinking that weird for percussion. It's like, you know, that they didn't have to be creative with that stuff, and it still would have been a great song. I feel like drums were just like, you keep time, you know, and that's pretty much it. That's your job. But they were like, let's turn everything on its head, you know. And I think it's really cool that Ringo felt free, I guess, to do that, you know, because it really just did so much for music, I think.
Absolutely. Well, let's just play it. That's a sick fill.
When the sun
love about that too is there's a few spots where they almost get off from each other.
Yeah.
Where it's definitely not cleaned up, which, again, those are my favorite parts of most of my favorite records.
Same, absolutely. Well, also because a song like that is very, you get the drone of the sitar and stuff. There's this kind of like, you're kind of on one note, even though it's not, but you kind of get this monotony that's like a good thing, but he's what's giving it color. And then obviously the harmonies and stuff. And the other tune I had was In My Life, just because I love how he's not, that was like an early example of when he just didn't need to keep time on hat or ride, just kick, snare real out of the way. And then, the example of the ride keeping time on the pre-chorus, and then he kind of comes in and it really does give, like, it's kind of instructing the listener of when to pay attention and how to pay attention, and he really is, it's not just tempo, he's pacing it in a way.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone, and some remain. All these places have their moments with lovers and friends I still can recall. Some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all.
Yeah, and I know I say this so much, but it really is about choices. Those you can give that to a younger drummer, and they're like, "What's so special about that?" It's like everything is special about that. That's such a stay out of the way, but also add a lot of color.
Yeah. They could have easily been
Sure.
And it just would have been kind of whatever in a way. I mean, the song still is great, but yeah, it made it so much more.
Well, and then that unison dome of the ride cymbal and the da 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 da. I was going to jokingly say yesterday for my choice because there is, but then I'll actually say it because there is earlier footage of, I don't know the timeline. I would assume maybe it's before they recorded it. There's footage of them playing yesterday, and Ringo is playing kind of a beat similar to In My Life of the chorus throughout yesterday. And so I'm sure, yeah. And so when they went to the recording, he is mature enough as a musician, or maybe it wasn't his choice, to be like, okay, this is going to be one of the greatest songs of all time, but I don't think I should be on it.
Yeah.
Which is that's a lesson in and of itself.
Yeah, for sure.
But I was also going to say, I don't want to, for the sake of time, but it's Taxman is one of my favorite songs because he doesn't bring in the hi-hat or the ride until he wants to, and it's like for 2 bars, then he goes back to just snare and hat, and the accents with the bass is really cool. But Taxman's a great song.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, number 4.
I kind of want to hear it. No.
Drum
tone.
Let's just do it. Let's play Taxman.
Let's do it. Pull.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
Let me tell you how it will be. There's 1 for you, 19 for me. 'Cause I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man. Should 5% appear too small? Be thankful I don't.
Yeah, and that's not an easy beat to play without extra syncopation and to stay locked. Do bap boop 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 bap boop bap boop boop boop. Like somebody's gonna get off, and who knows? Maybe we'd solo it up without the guitars and vocal, and it'd be like super messy. But it doesn't sound like it.
Well, I want to go back and listen to that "Come Together" thing you were saying, because that right there, the beat on Taxman, like you just said, you kind of have to have a little bit of a quick foot. But. So yeah, he's kind of a sleeper double bass guy. You never know.
Who knew? We did. We tried telling everybody.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So number 4 would be drum tone, which we kind of talked about. Either wallet on the snare or T-tails on everything. I feel like his drum sound is definitely his drum sound. And I mean, there might be others that were around that time that used it, but that's just not where my mind goes. It's a very Ringo thing to have that sort of dry, punchy kind of thing, that old Ludwig sound. So I feel like each record kind of had their own thing, but I think what gets referenced the most, just even by me, but certainly by other people asking for certain tones, is White Album. And Happiness is a Warm Gun would be my example of just tight as can be.
She's not a girl who misses much. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Oh yeah. She's well acquainted with the touch of the velvet hand, like a lizard on a window pane. The man in the crowd with the multicolored mirrors on his hobnail boots, lying with his eyes while his hands are busy working overtime. A soap impression of his wife, which he ate and donated to the National Trust.
Such a cool guitar tone.
I feel like that song works for deconstructing the drum beat as well, because just even that turnaround, how he just doesn't stop where the kick and the snare go. He doesn't like reset like everybody else does. He just keeps going, and somehow he manages to realign with everybody else.
Yeah.
Such a vibe.
I'll choose I'm So Tired.
That was going to be my other one, so I'm glad you picked it.
Well, there you go.
I battled.
I haven't slept a wink. I'm so tired. My mind is on the blink. I wonder, should I get up and fix myself a drink? No, no, no. I'm so tired. I don't know what to do. I'm so tired.
That's not 2 takes. Is that just like a microphone in like a chamber? Like how do they get that slapback delay?
I think that's tape delay.
Okay.
I think that's what that is. It does sound a little roomy, so it might be that they did do a room mic as well as a slapback, or maybe they added slapback to the room mic only. I'm not actually sure. I'm sure there's data out there, but I was just thinking that because I was listening. I was like, oh, this one's a little different. It's still that super dry, same. It sounds like the same drum kit, but definitely has a roomy slapback thing going. So I think that's probably what. I think you're right about that.
I will say I can't move on before we say, Big Fat Snare Drum does have some things that help you make those sounds.
Absolutely.
This is the podcast. This is it is the company I work for. So we have the quesadilla cloth head. We do have a lot of stuff that can help you get those super dry tones. Go to bigfatsnaredrum.com. All right, so number 5.
All right, so my number 5 is kind of a cop-out, but I feel like it's applicable.
I think it is, yes.
Which one? It is a cop-out or
No, sorry. I'm not going to tell you. No, I said it really quickly after the latter. I think it is applicable, and I agree wholeheartedly.
So it's what kind of makes the Ringo sound, I think, is as much to do with the first 4 that we named as much as it is the fact that he's just in a band in the Beatles. Like, he's with 3 guys that and it's hard to say. Maybe it changed from song to song, but it feels like they utilized him correctly, or maybe he utilized them correctly. Or maybe it just was all together. But it just seems like you can still tell that it's Ringo when you listen to Harry Nilsson or John Lennon solo stuff or whoever. But there is something about his evolution that I don't know if that would have gotten developed without that band doing everything that it did the way it did. And I think, I really struggled to find one song that would highlight that, but I chose A Day in the Life for a number of reasons. One, it's John and Paul working together, so I kind of felt like that was fair because, it's... George isn't highlighted there, unfortunately, but I think Ringo does a really interesting job of embodying all of those sections. He does the John Lennon section justice, and then he does the Paul McCartney thing super well. And they kind of they're very different takes on how to approach a drum beat. And I just love it.
Yep. I'm going to play the John Lennon part of it. I'm starting it for those, if you want to find it. It's about 40 seconds into the song, because the beginning of the song is, there's no drums.
He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. I saw a film today, oh boy. The English army had just won the war. A crowd of people turned away, but I just had to look, having read the book. I'd love to turn you on.
Yeah, that song, you played it with now, but I was obviously when it comes to the fills, that's when I think of Ringo fills, that song specifically is like the quintessential how to play a fill the second the vocal stops and then get out of the way when the vocals come back in.
Yeah.
It's flawless. And
I think that is a perfect drum tone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd be happy with that forever.
Mm-hmm.
That just, man. And, I'm curious to hear your selection on this one.
Well, this one I chose the naked version. And so if people don't know, there's the Let It Be, the one that Paul wanted, and then there's the more naked version that John wanted, if I'm remembering this correctly. So this is, and I prefer the naked version, the more just them, not the overproduced. Maybe Phil Spector did the more produced one, but
yeah.
Anyways, this is the long and windy road, and it's just Ringo just being able to it kind of goes, I guess, with number 4. Just he can just stay out of the way because the song is so good. So this is an amazing beat and an amazing song.
The long and winding road that leads to your door will never disappear. I've seen that road before. It always leads me here. Lead me to your door. The wild and windy night that the rain.
And I'm not even insecure that I chose a song that has such a mellow, almost non-existent drum part. But again, what he chose to do, I can't listen to that song without hitting those accents.
Yeah.
And again, it's perfect.
I couldn't, I mean, we could probably pick any song for any of these 5 and
Exactly.
find a way to apply it. And I think it's an excellent choice, because that's the hard part when, I mean, this as a session drummer, like somebody brings you a song, and granted they were in a band together, so that's a different dynamic, but it's still, it's John and Paul bringing you a song, or George, and it's like, here, do something with this. And it's a hard line to walk, because on one hand, you want to feel like you contributed something. So there is this pressure to like come up with a beat, play something there. And it's is it lazy, or does it seem like I didn't really care if I'm only playing Hat here? But so it's when I think of things like this from the context of having been in those situations where I'm like, I feel like I shouldn't play here at all, but you did ask me to be here to play something on this. So, it's kind of interesting to think about maybe what kind of conversations or thought process they would have had to arrive at that, or maybe it was just simply instinctual and it was that simple for them.
Well, I have taken up a lot of your time, but do you want to do some promo? Anything you want the audience to know about that's coming out?
Yeah, so I put out a solo EP a couple of years ago called From Deep Blue to Shallow Gold, and that was always intended to be a full length, but I just wanted to get it out sooner than later, so did it in 2 parts. So the second part I'm hoping will come out this fall. And then there's a collaboration project that I've been working on for 10 years now. That's 4 albums worth of material. Each song's featuring a different artist. I can't really reveal who yet, but a lot of really cool, diverse artists are involved. And it's sort of my life's work is kind of what I'm calling it, at least up to this point. So that'll come out next year. And then New Posey's album will come out sometime next year. That's already finished. We're done mixing it now, so it's just getting mastered and kind of lining up the release. So lots of new things. I think all my social media handles is at Frankie Audio, and my website is just my name, frankiesiragusa.com, as well as thelabstudiola.com, which is basically all info related to the studio itself. And I think that about covers it. Theposies.net, I believe, is our website link to figure out what's going on in Posey's land. Lots of new things will be happening. Spain tour next year for Posey's. I think a lot of people are curious if everything that's opening right now, if we'll be able to sustain that. So I think there's still a little bit of a timid vibe about booking next year, but I kind of, fingers crossed and, knock on wood, I think it's going to be a really busy next couple years, in fact. It's looking that way.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. It was good chatting with you, and I'll talk to you soon, dude.
You as well. See you, brother.
See you, dude. And that's the show. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're listening on a platform that allows for ratings or reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, which means the show will get better and bigger, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'd be an OG listener that could brag to all your friends. Anyways, also, why don't you go ahead and check out bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the socials. Just search for @BigFatSnareDrum and you will find it. This show is edited in part using Isotope RX8 audio editor. It's amazing, so go check that out at isotope.com. Bye.